Welcome to the Minus One podcast, where we ask the most interesting people in the world about times in their lives where they've had to answer a question we all eventually struggle with. What's next? Because before you launch at zero, you have to decide what to work on at minus one. I'm your host, Aditya Agarwal, partner at South Park Commons, joined this week by my fellow SPC partner, Jonathan Brebner.
Well, thanks, Aditya. We're both very excited today to be joined by none other than Reid Hoffman, who, this is going to be a long one. First context is, of course, I went to your LinkedIn, and I had to scroll multiple times to get to the bottom of your experience. I appreciate that you take your LinkedIn seriously. Reid is a prolific founder, investor, and philanthropist known for, among other things, being an early board member and executive at PayPal, co-founding LinkedIn, several decades of extremely influential investing as both an angel and as a partner at Greylock, and most recently for his critical role in seeding and cultivating the current AI revolution, and as a major Democratic political donor and activist philanthropist. So, Reid, what did I leave out?
Well, I always prefer the shorter introductions anyway, because people can always read them if they're actually more curious. They're much more interested. They're here to hear what we're going to talk about.
So, Reid, I'm curious, is there anything that you self-identify with as being a major kind of, like, I would say, contribution of your career that we maybe did not list in there?
You know, there's kind of a couple different chapters. There's a chapter of being a technology entrepreneur, and building various things, you know, LinkedIn probably being one of the most central ones, although most recently have gotten back to that with Inflection, AI and Pi. Then there is technology investor, which is, you know, partnering with amazing founders and CEOs and what, you know, they do in the world. And there's a whole stack of that. And some of that is also even as an employee, you know, being one of the so-called PayPal mafia, but going to Airbnb and, you know, Zynga and Facebook and a bunch of other things as ways of doing that. And then probably most recently is trying to get people to think about AI as the right kind of thing, which is human amplification. Because if you listen to a lot of the discourse around AI, that, you know, tends to be the, oh my God, the robots are coming for us. And actually, in fact, I think the question maybe is, can the robots get here soon enough? Because I actually think in various ways it's a human amplifier. And that, of course, is like books like Impromptu or podcasts like Possible or a whole bunch or advising governments and trying to influence, you know, how the G7 and the EU, you know, what conceptual frames they have for this, not just the US. And so there's just a whole stack of things as you go through these use different arcs. And then you get the playfulness, which is, oh, I discovered these new things about business. So I write the start of a view about be the entrepreneur of your own life and, you know, blah, blah, blah. So there's a whole stack of things. Actually, most recently, if people want to follow me in kind of entertaining ways, is to go look at the Perugia and Bologna speeches that I gave in Europe because they're about AI. And one context is a graduation and commencement speech, and one context is kind of a honorary doctorate, you know, how to think about we as Homo techne, as opposed to Homo sapiens, which actually I think is broadly incorrect as a classification. We actually evolved through our technology. Now, of course, there's a lot of different interesting lenses on, you know, Homo sapiens or Homo ludens, or game players, Homo techne, we're technology embodiers and users. Anyway, there's a whole stack of those things, and, you know, that's maybe where, you know, if I have a next phase, what I'm going to be doing more of is that form of philosophy.
I'm actually rereading Sapiens at the moment, which of course kind of ends with that exact sort of discussion. A little bit, I think, more of a downer, but has that question about should we be renaming what we are, given how different the world is and the way we interact with it now than it was, you know, 100 years ago, 100,000 years ago, et cetera. All right, so we listed a bunch of success at the beginning. Right? All those things that make it into your intro in a podcast tend to be the things that you were successful at. So where I'd really like to start is with failure. And specifically, I'd love to know if there is a thing that got away for you.
I definitely have had a number of failures. And to some degree, I think if you're not you're not playing the game hard and risky enough if you don't have some failures. Now, in an ideal universe, just like a startup, you're making small failures that teach you how to win the big games, as opposed to big failures. But big failures, my first startup, SocialNet, had a zone of idea, but like got go-to-market wrong, got construct the team wrong, got competition wrong. I mean, it was one of those things where at the end of every week, there were things I wish I knew at the beginning of the week. And now they're not like, oh, well, so-and-so return your phone call. It's like literally how to play this game, what to do. And that's what when Max Levchin and Peter Thiel were founding PayPal, each of them brought in their closest friend that knew a bunch of stuff about startups to be on the board. It's because Peter had been hearing from me about like, oh, don't try to hire people who have a decade-long plus experience with doing. Hire high-speed learners that are team players, as kind of as an orientation. And like that was just like lesson after lesson after lesson. And you wish you, of course, knew all that stuff in advance and succeeded more, but it doesn't stick with me as like a, like, oh shit, as much as a, well, I'm glad, like, I only really care when I really don't learn from something. Because that's part of what you should be doing. It's kind of the real Silicon Valley adjunct to Glengarry Glen Ross should always be learning. And then that really sticks with me. But because I obsess until I learn stuff, there's nothing I look back from, this failure, that failure, the other failure, that failure. And I'm happy to go through a parade of failures to make people realize that you only get to success by playing hard and sometimes really not winning. In order to do that. But what I do is anytime I have one of those, and also in general, I obsess about what would I learn from that particular thing.
But Reid, what I was going to say is that even amongst your illustrious, I would say, the PayPal mafia or your contemporaries, I think that the number of things you have accomplished in a number of different fields is remarkable. So I think the questions going through my head are, is your failure rate lower than most? Is your number of shots on goal higher than most? Or is your learning rate higher than most? Or is it some combination thereof?
I would say shots and shot process and learning rate. And the shot process is not just learning rate. I do have a tendency to try to figure out, like one of the generalized patterns I learned from Silicon Valley, and this is fortunately because I learn a lot, so learning may be the very first one, is this kind of seed, Series A, Series B, Series C financing path as a way of de-risking what you're doing. So I have a lot of willingness to experiment and to try something. When I'm looking at, okay, let's try it. And, the experiments are generally, would you learn something from it? If it worked, could you double down on it? Like the things you get from seed, Series A, Series B as a way of operating. And so like a recent one this year was releasing, the video of me talking to my digital twin using these off-the-shelf, AI technologies. I mean, I literally got a lot of feedback going, oh my God, people are going to hate this. They're going to be, tech billionaire doesn't care about Hollywood or doesn't care about what jobs away, or like, oh my God, deep fakes. And I was like, look, I think this is the world we're moving into. People need to start learning to experiment. And part of what I try to do is say, look at what you can do that's positive. I've got to be doing this. So let's just figure it out and do it. Now, again, it's like when we first did it, it was a seed, because it was like, well, go to two startups and buy their commercial product and get them to do the thing and stitch the thing together, a couple iterations on what a theme could be, and then kick it out and see what happens. And if we got back, oh my God, Reid is techno insensitive, this is all really, really terrible, we probably would have said, well, okay, look, here's what we're trying to do, but we wouldn't have done more of it. Whereas instead we got many requests from different, kind of basically TV journalists and others to interview Reid AI. So it's obviously grown to like a Series A stage. Anyways, but it's experiments.
Do you have like kind of sequential advice related to how to successfully fail along the say the fundraising path, right, from seed through IPO? Like, are there different things that you say to entrepreneurs at different points of the journey, because like that's when they need to hear it, and it's different at the seed stage, you know, than it is going to be when you're flying around the country before your IPO, and you kind of modulate the way you guide people through that, and the kind of like successes and failures that they're going to face at each of those steps?
There's definitely a lot of nuance and different advice. I mean, you know, one of the big ones is, do you have something that's where your worst case plan might be to sell the thing versus just close it down, right? So there's a tempo between those. So like when you start as a seed, no one's going to buy it, right? They may buy you, they may acquire you or something, but they're not going to buy the thing you have. And so by being really bold and risky, because, you know, it's downside is there's just alternative forms of worth zero. So it doesn't matter, like play it out. Once you begin to get to a more substantive thing where you actually have an asset, you might be making a decision about like, well, there could be zero or it could be worth something. And that then factors into which risks you take, how you might fundraise, you know, how bold you might be. And you still may be ultra bold, like put it all, you know, on, rolling number 8 and go for it. Or number 10, you know, depending on how risky it is and all the rest. But but that pattern changes. It also kind of changes a little bit of like, you know, where's your market, the window of your market opportunity. Like one of I think the harder things that most entrepreneurs have a difficult time doing is they go, well, I have an idea and I orient my value around having the idea and I've started working on it. And my idea is still pretty good and I'm not being thrashed by the competition, but the market window really changes. Like the technological base or the market receptiveness or something else. And frequently then you got to make a hard choice. And sometimes that hard choice is just shut it down. And that's really hard. And so, you know, there's all of that kind of comes into different decisioning. Then sometimes there's like real, like, what are you really good at or not? And like, you thought you were good at this, you're not, you should change, you know, that kind of stuff. You know, one of the most often pieces of advice that a VC will give that I rarely give is replace yourself as CEO. Because usually, even if you have a bunch of, like, say, for example, you suck at hiring executives. It's like, well, shit, that's a really bad place to be as a CEO. Even in those kinds of circumstances, you go, okay, trade off a risk of trying to get you better and learn to do better at hiring executives or bringing in someone who doesn't bleed the company as much as you do and is really much more, you know, even if passionate, is much more of a hired gun and isn't as all in committed as you are. And so usually it's stay with the person, you know, whether she or he, you know, in terms of doing it. So that would be a place that doesn't usually, that frequently, like board members and venture people will give as advice and don't have the same thing, which is I tend to think you always want the CEO to have a founder's mindset. And that was part of the reason I did the Masters of Scale podcast with Satya Nadella, you know, coining the term refounder, because it was like, hey, there is a founder's mindset. That's
a good term.
That's a really good term. Yeah. That wasn't, I was here, but that's in part what you're looking for as a CEO, but it's very hard to recruit for, right?
Yeah, coming back to your point about applying this fractal recursive nature of what is almost like the gated funding for all the projects that you see, and kind of fractally applying it even to the -1 projects. Curious to get your take on something, right? Like one of the more provocative things I tell founders nowadays is that I think that some of the lean startup methodology, or kind of like the over excessive focus on kind of what is your MVP, sometimes kind of leads people to not answer the question of what is the minimum thing you need to build to actually get signal on the idea, right? So I'm curious, like, as you're thinking through, like, you know, the awesome example that you gave of having an interview with your digital twin, which now in retrospect, that's risky, because you're right. You could have gotten a bunch of pushback on that, right? Like that is the kind of thing that sounds cool, and then you do it, you got a bunch of pushback. Did you really think hard about like, okay, what is the minimum, in some ways, kernel, minimum granule here that will give me the signal that I'm looking for? Or is your strategy more like, hey, this kind of feels good enough, I'm not going to think too hard about it, I'm just going to get it out there and see how people react?
Well, the way that I think about it is, I say, which questions would bear substantially on it? Not a little, but substantially, like would change the decision. Right, that's what substantially. It's not like, oh, that'd be good to know. Look, it's always interesting. Like, is that good to know? It takes me a 2-minute phone call with Aditya, and if it great, I'll do the 2-minute phone call. Right, but it's like no, something substantial. And so, I said, look, the quality would have to be good enough, right? Because it's not a good test if so. We'd have to be careful enough about what topics we're addressing and what we're showing. And show it with some compassion. Okay, I'll have to be like, I'll get some smart people involved, but I'll have to be involved enough in the script and the prep for it, even though they kind of surprised me at the end of that with the question of, what did you think about this experience? And I was like, oh, that wasn't part of our script, but it's all right. I'll answer that. I thought I would hate this, which is true. I actually thought because I don't like watching myself like in videos of myself and so on. So like, I thought I would go have the same kind of negative response that I have of, God, you said that's dumb thing, blah, 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 which a lot of us have. And it was like, actually, in fact, it was more interesting. It was like actually more like, oh, it's almost like a version of how you might think or talk to yourself, but in a different externalized way. That's kind of interesting.
Which is kind of a fascinating experience for most people to have, just as almost like a mental model realization of themselves. I think that could lead to really interesting outcomes.
Exactly. So what I did is I thought about, well, like, what are the key things? Quality, script, kind of like what I would do if I got back, like what would be if people went, we fucking hate this. And by the way, I had some friends say it was so creepy I couldn't finish watching it. Right. And so like if I got a like a kind of a Arctic wind hurricane blowback, what would I do or say? And because, whenever you're doing stuff, essentially, anything in the world, anything publicly, etc., you should never disown it. People might, say, well, why did you think that was a good idea? You should at least be able to say why you thought it was a good idea.
Right. By the way, Reid, the last time we met, you gave me a piece of advice that I've actually been applying more consistently now, which is that at any stage of a project, just ask yourself, who are 3 people who I trust, who I can call up, and actually give them the call. This is something that not enough people do nowadays, because most of us probably have a few people whose opinion we would trust on almost like anything we might want to do. So just kind of pick up the phone, talk to someone, and do that, and it's not research, it's just like some friendly advice. It goes a really long way. I've been doing this a lot more.
Yeah. By the way, and this is the other thing I would say on the premise of the question, which is, you don't need to have actually minimum viable product for data. When you have 0 of that, you can still make those 3 phone calls. Yeah. And that's still very useful.
Exactly.
Right? Because you're like, okay, because like, for example, if all 3 of them say, this will suck because of this, you're like, oh, 3 smart people who are the 3 people I chose to call all told me that. I'm going to think about that very hard about what I might know that they don't.
Right. No, that's just such a good point. Yeah.
All right. So we talked a little bit about let's say the advantages of failure. I'd like to ask about the tragedy of success. So there is an old curse that goes something like, may you get everything that you thought you wanted. And as someone who has presumably gotten many of the things that he thought he wanted, have you found that there is like a tragedy in success? Or rather, when you have accomplished something and suddenly you are no longer working on this thing that you've been pouring yourself into, how do you deal with that experience? It's one that's very relevant to SBC in particular. We were founded by Ruchi out of that experience of kind of leaving rocket ship rides and then suddenly coming to a hard stop and being like, well, now what? So I'm interested in how you have experienced that, because you have been successful at a lot of different things.
I think the high line is, don't go from doing something intensely to a long period of doing nothing. do something. But by the way, one virtue of going in a moderately different direction is that you're then not intrinsically comparing yourself. So for example, it's like if I were to go and try to build another, quote unquote, social network of some sort, look, I think I could do it, but there would be well, am I doing it as well as I did LinkedIn? Am I showing that I was smart when I would do it with LinkedIn, or just lucky, or is it timing? Or you get wrapped up in a bunch of those questions. And so frequently, strategically, it's smart to not go try to do the same thing that you were massively successful at. But obviously you want to use similar networks, similar assets, similar strategic capabilities, a stack of different things in it. So it doesn't mean like I was successful as an entrepreneur, I should now invest only. It's like, no, you can do other, I think repetitive entrepreneurs, but like, for example, that's part of the reason I was like, this AI thing, that's actually in fact very different, even though there's some patterns and, agents and chatbots and thinking about network effects and thinking about like compounding growth curves and thinking about other kinds of things that will be, like old hat for me. There will be a bunch of new things in it too. And so I'm not like kind of always going, well, how is this? Now, someone who only cares about like exit equity value or something else will then, anytime they're doing something with economics, they'll index themselves on the equity value. And it's like, I don't actually view the nuances of equity value. And what I mean by nuances is it 1 billion or 10 billion? I don't view that to be central to the way I think at all. You obviously are trying for the 10 or the 26 or the whatever that you're trying to, but you're like, if you create another 10 billion, like say for example, I were to co-found another company that turns into a $10 billion company. I don't go, oh, well, my LinkedIn thing was so much better because it was higher. It's like, no. What impact you have in the world? What did you build? How did it make a difference? And it's like, yeah, LinkedIn's pretty amazing, but you can add to it as opposed to like trying to exceed it. You're adding to it, to the things that you're trying to do. And so it's those major adds as a way of doing it with some variation. And I think but anyway, to return to the really key thing, which is if you're successful at something, don't live in that success. Take your learnings, appreciate it, continue to appreciate it. Like you built this thing that's continuing to add a whole bunch of value into people's lives in the world. Great. Like I take pride of LinkedIn today, and I haven't been in the LinkedIn offices. I've been in the Microsoft offices, but I haven't been in the LinkedIn offices in years, since before COVID. And so, but I still am enormously proud of Ryan and the whole team about the stuff they're doing. And so anyway, so that may be a kind of a set of thing about that, but I don't tend to get, well, actually, what I will say is the area that I think most people get tripped up about success, and I make a real effort not to, which is, once you're successful, people tend to think you're a genius at everything. And so it's trying to approach you like you're a genius at everything. And so I've literally been approached with questions that are like, I literally don't know anything more about that question than the person who's asking me the question is like student mentor kind of thing. And I'm like, look, I'm really, really good at this technology, consumer internet, entrepreneurship stuff. This thing, and I'll just be like, your poetry question, I know people who are really good, who I would ask. I am not one of them, right? And what happens is people then go into, and you see these kind of epically large failures of people who go, because I'm a genius at this, I'm a genius at everything. And so it's important to keep like, okay, I'm current at this, I'm really good at this, and I'm not so good at that. And like if you don't have an answer of the things that you're not good at, that frankly is a longer list than the things you are good at, you have a self-awareness ego problem.
It sounds like the first response for how to, manage success is stay curious, right? Try something that is different, but also don't convince yourself that you are going to automatically succeed, right? That you can do anything. Like, what is the distinction there? How do you kind of draw that line and get the advantages of thinking that, hey, I could go into a new area and learn about something and potentially have an impact there, versus thinking, because I have succeeded previously, I will automatically, obviously, be able to succeed here.
Folks who work with me know that a metaphor that I use, a framework that I use a lot for this, is theory of the game. So it's, what's your theory of the alternative game? And why do you think that you can potentially win this new game? If your theory is because I win every game that I do, you're like, well, again, that's not true for like everybody. That's not true, right? You may be more capable of winning many games than other people are. So it's kind of, and by the way, think about a little bit of like what your self-belief is. That's right, conviction. But then also a little bit about what your data of it is. Like, for example, I'm unlikely to do any startup as a co-founder or as an operator. I could invest in a few things. I've invested in some fusion things and some vision things and some aeronautics things and so forth. I could invest in things where I go, I would not be a good operator. But like, I basically won't be in any kind of like an operational role if it's outside of software. Right. It's like, look, I have a very strong set of things in software, and I might push myself a little bit, like more enterprise and less consumer, or more embedded software into a hardware device or something like that. But it's like, look, I know the software game, and I have a good theory of the game of why I'd be good. And if someone came along and said, co-found this battery company with me, it'd be like, no. And not no, because I might go, oh, you're totally right that would be the thing that would totally change a whole bunch of stuff. Be like, look, I'll give you some money, but like my instincts will be wrong. What I think will be important to do will be wrong. The errors to avoid will be wrong. And maybe if I had to start from absolute scratch, like there was nothing else to do, then I would do it. But I would have to do it from like literally, like I am now apprentice, right? As kind of an orientation. So that's what I'd say is kind of wherever it is. Like I go, okay, I could write a book on this. It's like, okay, I've got some experience writing books. I've got some knowledge about this. I've got some knowledge about how to make the book work. Fine, right? But it's like, yes, I will. And by the way, my very first book, Startup You, was in part like, well, is this something that works, right? And we started with experiment. We rewrote 50,000 words together as a set of essays, because again, starting with experiment, with the thought of, if the book's not going to work, we just say, okay, let's go to get the essays out and then move on to other things. So you kind of have your plan B and plan Z, in these things as well. So anyway, and having a theory of the game that encompasses all of that. And Aditya, you had something too.
I was going to say an anecdote, which is that all of us who worked earlier at Facebook, we kind of joke after the fact that the easiest way to become sad after working at Facebook was if you tried to start another social network. Especially if you try to start another social network talking about, I'm going to do all of the things that I wish we had done at Facebook, but instead somewhere else. And the reason is because quite literally Facebook is the fastest growing kind of like consumer product of all time, right? And you can do it. We did a lot of things wrong at Facebook, but sometimes it's just some combination of path dependence, luck, being in the right place, right time, to Reid's point, the market being kind of like the right level of development. And I think you forget also that, to not take away that all of the starting conditions and some of the path dependence is under your control, right? So it's when you forget some of those things and you try to rewire it the second time around is when you really get into trouble, I think, yeah.
Yep, and actually part of the thing that most people, it's one of the reasons why I think, to some degree, chess has a lot of failures in terms of teaching strategy. One, there's no epistemic uncertainty. Right. The board is the board. Another one is there's no randomness and changes in the circumstance. And one of the things you have to do in both life plan and in work plan and in company plans is to say there will be events that change things, competitors, markets, a bunch of stuff, and you need to be able to adjust to that. Right. And by the way, that doesn't mean that you can guarantee success. I mean, it's like, take kind of a totally amazing story, Tesla. Well, if Toyota didn't come along and say, here, have our, multi-billion-dollar plant for $10 million.
In San Jose or something. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Fremont. Like, would Tesla still exist? Who knows? Or maybe they would have found something else. Maybe. Right? But it's like, that kind of thing. Now, part of, again, successful strategy and working hard is like trying to be in a place where you maximize your chances at luck. But maximizing luck is not 100%. Maximizing luck is moving from 10 to 20 or 20 to 30. That's what maximizing luck is.
Obviously, we are on the -1 podcast, which is a reference to -1 to 0, which I have no idea when this will release. So maybe at this point, people will be tired of us hammering home that particular connection. But, it's about how do you figure out how to spend the next 5 to 10 years of your life on something, right? Like, how do you build enough conviction in order to bet your life on it, in a sense, right? The short amount of time that you have. So what is the process for you? How do you build that conviction? And can you articulate what conviction feels like to you?
And this is a little bit of why, what the reason why, one of the key pieces of advice, that I give people, and Aditya was reflecting on earlier, is go talk to people. And the way you talk to them is not tell me how to do this better or tell me why this is good. It's what's wrong with this? Why will this fail? Right. So you're navigating those things. And obviously winning is not the thing of not failing, but if you fail, you cannot win. So you got to be paying attention to that too. The kind of way to build that conviction is you have to have enough expertise. If you're going to take something that's call it a 5 to 10 year project, you have to build into a place where you have enough expertise at it and around the table that when you're making a conviction bet on it, you're making a smart bet. Like, for example, even though I had zero expertise in launching companies when I did SocialNet, I knew that I wanted to be doing software startups, right? And I knew that there was a substantial chance that SocialNet was going to fail. And so that one of the really key things along the lines was learning intensively. Because if it failed, then the second shot I was going to take, which I was like I was certain that I was going to do, so kind of like 5, 10 years, would have a much higher prediction, of ability to win. And so what got me into the conviction of doing that was the conviction of not that SocialNet was the thing that was going to succeed, and as it was like just tremendous failure after failure after failure in it, but that the path was getting there. And for example, but you had adjusted to the market, like you adjusted to things you were learning, which is like, I'm here doing SocialNet. Peter's asked me to be on the founding board of PayPal. Okay, I'll do that. Oh, rather than going and start up another company when SocialNet's not working, I'll go join PayPal, even though my mental model had been I'm going to go start something else, because that was the better play to make this stuff happen. And that kind of iteration on this stuff. It doesn't mean you're locked into one thing 5 to 10 years from now, but it's like, here is what this major lock-in that will have me doing these kinds of things for 5 to 10 years, but even 20 to 30, that's how it iterates to. Now, obviously, when you're part of the thing that's different than when between having raised no money and raised little money and raised little money and real money and investing people, is at that point, your pivotability, your personal pivotability is less because you have responsibilities. So even if you go, hey, I'm 3 years in, this isn't really working, and someone's offering me a really good job, you can't go, oh, screw the rest of you, I'm going and taking that good job. That's dishonorable in lots of directions. You have to go, okay, how do I help this thing land the right way? Maybe I sell it for not very much money, and I have to go along with it for X months or a year, as I'm doing that, et cetera, or, blah, 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 blah. Or, hey, so-and-so wants to hire me. Can they buy the whole company? As kind of instances of kind of navigating this kind of stuff. And you have to pay attention to that too. And that's one of the prices that you have to be willing to pay to have your conviction level high enough in order to do it.
I want to circle back to something that you were actually talking about right at the top of the episode, which is kind of being a public intellectual for AI optimism. Why are you such a public optimist about AI? Like, what is your kind of brief case for it?
So maybe three things in quick order. So one is every major technology, every single time the human response has been, oh shit. Like if you look at a lot of this discourse around AI, it very much resembles the discourse around the printing press, right? You know, it's going to spread misinformation, cause the collapse of cognition, you know, da-da-da-da. So it's okay. Two, which of course not been the case history, and people then say, well, but this one's different, which of course has also been each time, but this one's different. Two, on this one being different or not, I do think that like all these technologies, you have to look at, like, I do think that one could shape it in various ways that'd be bad for humanity and drive specifically toward that. But I think there's lots of ways to shape it for positive humanity. And even though we have a bunch of competitive forces and some bad people in the world, I think the natural thing is towards driving it to things that are good. And so you look at what the things are good are. So you kind of go, well, I don't know about this AI thing, but how about having a medical assistant on every smartphone that runs for $1 an hour? I'm like, well, that's pretty good, right? You go, what does it do for doctors' jobs? I'm like, I guarantee you it'll be fine for doctors' jobs. Right? I guarantee it. And so, you know, I think that kind of thing is to like be looking at what those optimists and how to shape it. And so, like, for example, and this gets to my third point, which is it's actually, in fact, very easy to be critical of the new. And so, like, for example, if I said, hey, I've got this idea for creating a 2-ton death machine that people can get drunk and run over small children, what do you think? People say, oh my God, we have to stop that. And here's the list of 200 things that we're going to need to be able to do. But by the way, if you have a list of 200 things, you're never going to get to it. And maybe in the list, of course, would be seat belts and airbags and, you know, some other things. You go, great. And we did get to those. But the only way we got to those is by going down the path. And that's, you know, again, the kind of optimistic of iterating your way to it. And so that's fundamentally the reason. And once you start looking at it, you realize what are the ways that people could make themselves a lot stronger using it. So just like the steam engine gave us the physical powers for, you know, of the muscles, you know, for transport and manufacturing and construction, this is the steam engine of the mind for mental superpowers. And sure, it won't do the dishes for us, which we would really like, right? And it's a little irritating because it may be a lot better at poetry or sonnets than I am, but fine. Like, how do you use it as a tool? A computer is much better than a lot of things than I am, and that's fine. It's still a tool that helps me do stuff, and the phone is better at a bunch of things than I am, and it's still a tool that helps me navigate my life and so forth.
Why don't we end with some rapid fire questions here? So these are, you know, meant to be quick answers. If you are an ambitious young person listening to this, or a seasoned person listening to this, and thinking, what are the things that are most likely to haunt me 10 years from now, right? What are the things I'm going to look back on and be like, I wish I had? What did people get to kick themselves for?
So one, start playing with AI and use it for serious tasks. The worst AI you'll ever use is your AI you're using today. That's a great line from Ethan Mullick in his book, Co-Intelligence. And then the second thing is, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So don't think that like the entire world is going to be totally different. There's still going to be principles about businesses and careers and networks of people and that kind of stuff. Things change, but like, you know, like form your team, you know, team Susan or team Bob, you know, for you know, like how you're going through life.
Sorry, I got one more. If you had to drop everything and work on something new, what it would be?
Well, to some degree, I have the choice of doing that, you know, and I haven't gotten around to dropping everything. I mean, at the moment, I'm working on the 2024 election and AI in society, right?
Small things,
Yeah,
Small things.
Small things. Yes.
Okay, Reid, stealing from Tyler Cohen, who's also recently on this podcast. What is one piece of conventional wisdom that you absolutely agree with?
Well, one thing that's sometimes said is it's not what you know, it's who you know, and I would say it's less what you know and more who you know. I'll add the thread.
Yeah.
It's funny. I don't really think. I think about indexing against conventional wisdom,
Same.
so
Yeah.
I'm having to recalc to get to this. I guess I would say the following as a general principle. Like in many things, as we know, the way you get breakout success, companies, other things, is to be contrarian and right. Now, people then take that as an over license frequently for being contrarian, because most often contrarian is wrong, right? And
That's why it's contrarian.
yeah, and that's why it's contrarian. And so the piece of conventional wisdom is while I would agree to seek out the contrarian and right, be very epistemically humble, and really think about it, talk to people, et cetera, about why this particular contrarianism is right. And I think that's a little bit of the reason why, like, for example, if you look at kind of, I think some of what's going on in a lot of democracies right now tends to be the institutions are failing, we should tear them down and reinstitute new things. Actually, in fact, preserving institutions and renovating institutions is most often, like 99.99%, the right thing to do, because otherwise you end up with like the French Revolution, the year zero in Cambodia, other things which are like tremendous catastrophes, because renovating institutions is much better than, knocking them completely down and rebuilding from scratch.
It's a good one, which is that in order to be contrarian, you really, in some ways, your bar for your belief and almost like your conviction level just goes up by multiple orders of magnitude, right? Like if you're sufficiently contrarian. Because
Exactly.
it's fashionable to be to be sloppily contrarian, I think is what also you're saying. Yeah.
Exactly. By the way, there's another funny one, because as we all know from living in Silicon Valley, a common question is, what do you believe that no one else believes? Right. That question is, I think, is a misform, because literally the thing you believe that no one else believes, you're probably insane on. Right. Right. So it's kind of like, it's more like, what are you insane about? Now, the more focused point of that question is, against a relevant market where you're expert and they're expert, what do you believe that they don't believe?
Yeah.
Is the interesting question.
Correct. Like from the same fact basis and a position of expertise, where might you draw I actually think those are the basis of the most interesting companies, because it means you have actually discovered maybe a new truth that is not apparent yet in the market. Yeah. Interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Reid, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today and share more about your many experiences in tech in Silicon Valley and in politics, AI, everything. It's been a pleasure. Thanks.
My
Thank you so much,
pleasure.
Reid.
Love what you guys are doing. Yeah.